Alright guys, here we go again. You may have heard the claims that things from the past were better, and in some cases, that is true. And this is interesting. In some cases, there really is a strategy to deliberately reduce a product's lifespan, make it harder to repair, or make a product seem old before it has actually stopped working. The fact that a battery loses capacity, that a component fails, or that a new model appears does not by itself prove that the manufacturer designed the product to die. Planned obsolescence is something much more specific. It is designing, manufacturing, or managing a product in such a way that its commercial usefulness ends before it technically could have lasted. And keep this in mind, because it can happen in several ways. It can be physical. It can be technological. It can happen through software. Or it can even be psychological. Yes, psychological. Your phone may still be working perfectly, but then the new model appears, the design changes, the camera, the screen, the processor. And suddenly the phone that was modern yesterday seems old. And here is what's interesting. This idea did not begin with cell phones. It is more than a century old. In fact, there was a time when manufacturing something that lasted too long could become an economic problem for the company itself. And to understand why, we have to go back to the 1920s. Imagine a factory that has just discovered how to manufacture a much better product. More durable. More resistant. And less likely to need replacement. Sounds perfect for the consumer, because as consumers, we would love to never have to spend money on the same thing again. But guess what? That cannot happen because without companies, the economy falls apart, and having things last a very long time mainly affects companies because they have to keep selling and keep the economic wheel turning, and the company has to find another way to sell something to you. And here we have one of the most famous cases in history. Light bulbs. During the first decades of the 20th century, manufacturers competed to improve their lifespan. But in 1924, something quite serious happened. Several of the major lighting companies formed what became known as the Phoebus Cartel. Its objectives included controlling the market and standardizing the characteristics of light bulbs. And among those decisions was reducing their lifespan. Historical research documents how the standard moved toward around 1,000 hours, while previously light bulbs with considerably longer lifespans could be found. And here is what is truly interesting. It was not simply about manufacturing a low-quality light bulb. They had to achieve something much more complicated. Make it last approximately long enough to sell more units, but without failing in a completely unpredictable way. There were even tests to check how long they lasted. In other words, the lifespan of a product could become an economic variable. And this leaves us with an uncomfortable question. What happens when technology allows you to manufacture something that lasts much longer than the business needs it to? Because that problem did not disappear. It simply changed form. And a few years later, an even more radical idea appeared. In 1932, during the Great Depression, Bernard London published a text called Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. His proposal was quite extreme. London suggested that products should have a predetermined lifespan and that, after that period, they would legally be considered obsolete. And back then it was not as blatant as it is now, since over the years this lifespan has been considerably reduced, but why? Because he saw a very particular economic problem. Factories could produce enormous quantities of goods, but there was little demand to buy them. There were goods, but there were not enough buyers. And here we have an idea that completely changes the way we look at consumption. If a product lasts too long, you need fewer new products. But if the product is replaced more frequently, production increases. More production means more jobs. More sales, more everything. And that is where obsolescence can seem attractive from a business perspective. But keep this in mind. That does not automatically mean it is good for the economy. Because there is a huge difference between creating demand and simply making people throw away something that still works. And that difference would become even more important when companies discovered that they did not even need to physically break a product. They could make the consumer want to replace it. And this is where automobiles come in. In the 1920s, General Motors began using frequent design and styling changes to stimulate purchases in an automotive market that was beginning to become saturated. And that changed the rules of the game. Because now a product could become old, even though it still worked perfectly. And here, guys, is where the story gets good. Because imagine you have a 5-year-old car. It works. The engine works. The transmission works. You do not have any major problems. But then the new model arrives. It has a different grille, different headlights, a more modern interior, and some new features. Suddenly, you start feeling like your car is outdated. That is different from a mechanical failure. The product is still working. What changed was its perceived value. And something even worse, the new car comes with a new safety regulations that now make them like paper. And this strategy eventually became an extremely powerful commercial tool. Because a company no longer had to wait for the product to break. It could convince you that you needed a new one. And here we have another form of obsolescence. Psychological obsolescence. And that one is much more interesting. Because now a product can be physically perfect and, even so, lose functionality because its software stops receiving updates. A phone can have a perfectly functional screen. The battery can still be working. The processor can still power the device. But if certain applications stop being compatible, the product begins to lose usefulness. And here is the fundamental difference. Failing is not the same as becoming obsolete. A product can continue working and, nevertheless, become less useful. And that takes us directly into the modern world. Let's think about a phone.
Suppose you buy a new one.
The first year, it works perfectly. Second year, too. Third year, the battery does not last as long anymore. That is normal wear. But now imagine another situation. The hardware still works. However, it stops receiving important updates. Then some applications stop being compatible. Later, security problems appear. And finally, the manufacturer no longer offers certain parts. This does not necessarily mean there is a conspiracy. There may be technical, economic, or security reasons. But for the user, the result can end up being similar. The product still works. But it becomes useful for fewer and fewer things. And this has already become so important that some governments are beginning to regulate it. For example, since June 20th, 2025, the new European Union rules for smartphones and tablets sold in its market include requirements regarding durability, batteries, repairability, availability of spare parts, and software updates. In certain cases, manufacturers must provide critical parts for years and maintain operating system updates for a minimum period. Why do all of this? Because the problem is no longer simply how much it costs to buy a product. Now, it also matters how long it can remain useful. And here is the part that is almost never explained. Obsolescence can generate economic activity, but it can also destroy value. If you replace a perfectly functional phone with another one, the factory sells. Transportation makes money. The store makes money. The manufacturer makes money. But minerals also had to be extracted, energy had to be used, components had to be manufactured, the product had to be transported, and eventually the previous one had to be discarded or recycled. So the question is no longer simply, And this is where planned obsolescence enters a much more sophisticated stage. Because before, you needed a light bulb to burn out. Then you could make a car look old. But now you do not even need to physically touch the product. You can change its software. And that is much more powerful. A phone can have a perfectly functional processor, memory, camera, and screen. But if the operating system stops being updated, some functions slowly begin to disappear. And here is an important technical concept: software support. Basically, it is the period during which a company continues developing updates, fixing errors, and solving security problems for a device. Those in quotes, because the vast majority of updates are designed to saturate older software. When that support ends, the device does not necessarily die. It simply starts falling behind. And this has an advantage for the manufacturer. It does not need to physically manufacture an inferior product. It can maintain fairly good hardware and establish an upgrade cycle. The problem appears when that cycle is too short, because then the consumer may end up buying another device long before the previous one has exhausted its physical capabilities. And here we have one of the great debates of the modern economy. How long should a technological product really last? Because we cannot ignore the other side either. Updating technology costs money. Maintaining servers costs money. Developing software costs money. Testing compatibility costs money. Well, and basically breathing does not cost anything because they have not figured out how to measure how much oxygen we consume, but if they could, it would cost money too. Anyway. And a company cannot indefinitely maintain every device it has manufactured for 20 years either. So, where do we draw the line? Now, let's think about another example. Batteries. Here we have one of the easiest cases to understand. A lithium-ion battery does not maintain exactly the same capacity throughout its entire life. Every charge and discharge cycle produces internal chemical changes. Over time, the battery may store less energy. That is degradation. And here is a very important difference. The fact that a battery wears out does not automatically mean planned obsolescence exists. The problem appears when the design makes replacing that battery unnecessarily complicated or expensive. Because if a battery is inexpensive and can be easily replaced, you can keep the device for many years. But if replacing it requires you to practically disassemble the entire device, use special tools, or go to the manufacturer, repair becomes less attractive. And here we have another concept: repairability. Repairability measures, in simple terms, how easy it is to repair a product when something fails. And this is changing the way governments and consumers evaluate products. Because for a long time the conversation was, how much does it cost to buy it? Now more and more people are beginning to ask, how much is it going to cost me to maintain it? And that question completely changes the economics. A cheap product that lasts 3 years may end up costing more than an expensive one that lasts 10. That is why the purchase price does not tell the whole story. You have to add maintenance, spare parts, repairs, energy, and eventually replacement. And this is where obsolescence begins to directly affect your wallet, because it can make the consumer buy more often, even though they are not necessarily receiving more value. But keep this in mind. We also have to recognize something that is often lost in this discussion. Innovation also causes older products to lose value. And that is not always a malicious strategy. Think about a car. 20 years ago, it could have been excellent. But today a new model may have better brakes, better safety systems, lower fuel consumption, and technologies that simply did not exist before. Does that mean the manufacturer is forcing the consumer to change? Not necessarily. Sometimes we are simply seeing technological progress. The problem appears when the two things are confused. One thing is, we have created something much better. And something completely different is. We're going to prevent the previous product from continuing to be useful. The difference seems small, but economically it is enormous. Because innovation can create new value. Artificial obsolescence can simply transfer money from the consumer to the manufacturer through more frequent replacements. And here comes an even more uncomfortable question. What is better for a company? Selling you a product that lasts 20 years, or selling you 5 products over those same 20 years? The answer depends entirely on the business model. If a company primarily makes money by selling new units, it has an incentive to increase the frequency of purchases. But if it makes money through maintenance, subscriptions, spare parts, or services, it may be interested in exactly the opposite. And this brings us to something that is changing the industry quite a lot: the business model. Because imagine a company that does not just sell a machine. It also sells the spare parts, the maintenance, the software, the warranty, the updates, and even the technical service. In that case, the company can make money throughout the entire life of the product. It no longer necessarily needs the customer to throw away the entire machine. It can keep it running and continue charging for services. And this opens up a very interesting possibility. Making more durable products can also become a profitable business. In fact, some industries have been operating that way for decades. In industrial machinery, for example, the value is not only in selling a machine. It is in keeping it running, because 1 hour of downtime can mean thousands of dollars in losses. There, the company has a completely different incentive. The product has to last because its customer needs it to produce. And look how curious this is. The same logic that can be a problem in a consumer phone can be completely different in an industrial machine. That is why we cannot talk about companies as if they all had exactly the same incentives. It depends on the product. It depends on the customer. It depends on the market. And it depends on how the company makes money. But now comes the biggest part of all. Because if we constantly replace products, it does not only affect our wallets, it also affects the global economy. Every product we buy needs a huge chain behind it. A phone needs minerals. A screen needs glass and specialized materials. A processor needs ultra-pure silicon. A battery needs different raw materials. Then every component has to be manufactured, transported, assembled, packaged, distributed, and finally delivered into our hands. Now, imagine doing all of that once, versus doing it 2, 3, or 4 times during the same period. Economic activity increases. Factories produce more. Transport companies move more goods. Stores sell more. Manufacturers generate more revenue. But resource consumption also increases. And here we have a rather interesting paradox. Obsolescence can boost certain economic indicators because it generates sales and production. But that does not necessarily mean society is wealthier. Because producing 10 products when you previously needed one can generate a lot of economic activity. But it can also mean that you use 10 times more materials, energy, and transportation. That is why economic growth and resource efficiency do not always move in the same direction. And this is where recycling, repair, and reuse come in. If a product can be repaired instead of discarded, you can preserve much of the economic value that already exists inside it. If a battery can be replaced, you do not need to throw away the entire device. If a computer can be upgraded, you can extend its useful life. And if a product can be properly recycled, part of its materials can return to the industry once again. So the discussion is no longer simply whether planned obsolescence is good or bad, because the real problem lies much deeper.